I was at a dinner in D.C. a few weeks ago, seated next to a man who, for decades, has been a pillar of the community. Think finance, philanthropy, policy, a classic story of 20th century American success. He spoke with this easy, earned confidence, the kind you get from seeing your community thrive, moving from the margins to the very center of American life. In academia, in media, in Washington itself, he was the walking embodiment of the Golden Age. But then the conversation turned to a recent vote in Congress, and someone mentioned a viral clip from a campus protest. I watched the confidence on his face just curdle. It wasn't anger. It was something more like anxious exhaustion. He leaned in and said, "It's not just the left. We're getting it from the populist right, too." And honestly, I'm more worried about our kids. They don't seem to feel the same connection. That sudden shift, from the assurance of a man at the center of the empire to the profound anxiety of someone who feels the foundation cracking beneath his feet, captured this strange dual reality. It's a feeling that is now everywhere, asking one unsettling question.
And that's exactly the question we're here to tackle. Welcome to the deep dive. That anxiety you're describing, that shift from confidence to this really profound doubt, it's the emotional core of where the American Jewish community finds itself today.
It really is. It feels palpable.
It does. And our mission today is to, analyze the forces that are actually at play here. We're going to look at the demographic, the religious, and the political shifts that are, they're redefining what Jewish identity in the U.S. even means.
And really testing the whole structure of the community.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to define this idea of the Golden Age, understand what it was built on, this concept of a unifying civil religion, and then, really rigorously examine why so many thinkers are looking at the data, some of it really startling, and saying that it's over.
Okay, so let's start right there. This term, the Golden Age. When people use it, I think there's an assumption it's just about, prosperity, financial success. But what are historians and sociologists really talking about? What made it so golden?
It was definitely a period of prosperity, but you're right, it's so much more profound than just money or status. The initial Golden Age is generally seen as the decades right after World War II. Mm-hmm. It happened alongside the huge expansion of the American middle class.
Okay.
And the defining feature was the successful, really unprecedented integration. I mean, you have to remember, for generations, Jewish immigrants and their kids faced quota systems, all kinds of societal barriers.
So the country clubs, the universities.
All of it. But after the war, you see this incredible, almost vertical trajectory. American Jews moved so quickly from the margins right into the center of major American institutions. Finance, policy, the arts, academia, media, all of it.
So the key was integration, but without forced assimilation. That's the difference, right? They could maintain a strong community while also being accepted at the highest levels.
Exactly. That's the perfect way to put it. But the analysis we're looking at refines this even more, suggesting that the true Golden Age, the real peak, was a very specific alignment of factors that came together after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War.
Ah, okay. So it's a more specific window.
A very specific window, from the late 60s to maybe the late 90s. And it was defined by a few critical things lining up just perfectly. It created this environment of just maximum communal confidence.
And what were those critical factors? What lined up so perfectly?
Okay, so first, domestic anti-Semitism was at a genuine historical low. Second, political support for Jewish causes and interests. It was peak bipartisan. I mean, it was almost a given in Washington. Nobody questioned it.
Right.
And third, Israel itself completely transformed. Before 67, Israel was often seen by parts of the U.S. establishment as, a bit of a diplomatic liability, a distant cause. After 67, it rapidly became a vital strategic ally for the United States.
So you have this confident, influential American community with a deep, unquestioned connection to a now powerful and politically secure state of Israel.
That was it. That was the absolute height of the Golden Age confidence.
And this is where it gets so fascinating, because that success wasn't just built on external factors like economics and politics. It was held up by an internal framework, a kind of spiritual and intellectual glue.
Yes. The civil religion. Yeah. That was the crucial unifying element. This idea was most famously articulated by a social scientist named Jonathan Wucher back in 1986.
And he was borrowing from an older idea, right?
He was. He borrowed from the sociologist Robert Bellah, who described this kind of transcendent universal religion that bound all Americans together, through shared civic values, despite all their different personal religions. Wucher basically argued that American Jews had built their own parallel version of that.
So a system of beliefs that were seen as sacred, inviolable, and they united everyone, no matter if they were Orthodox, conservative, Reform, or even completely secular.
Precisely. It was the common language of belonging.
The lowest common denominator that still had real weight.
That's it. You could argue all day about keeping kosher or driving on Shabbat, but you were still united by this set of beliefs that were seen as, well, as essential to the survival of the people. Wucher laid out 4 core tenets, 4 pillars of this civil religion.
And these 4 pillars are what we need to measure against the data today. They're the foundation we're talking about cracking. So what were they?
Okay, pillar 1. The unity of the Jewish people. This idea that all Jews everywhere in the world are one family. It transcends geography, it transcends politics.
Got it. One people.
Second, mutual responsibility. The feeling that you are obligated financially and socially to help other Jews in need wherever they are in the world.
The engine of philanthropy, basically.
Absolutely. Third, the centrality of the state of Israel. Viewing Israel as the spiritual and, for some, the physical homeland, something that required political and financial defense. And finally, number 4, Jewish survival.
Which means what, exactly?
Fundamentally, it was the desire for your descendants to remain Jewish, to actively work for the continuity of the people. These 4 ideas were the sacred glue of the Golden Age.
And this brings us to the core, and honestly, the most devastating finding from the most recent Pew data. It just completely dismantles this entire structure you've laid out.
It's the point of no return. The analysis starts with those pillars, and then the data from the new Q survey comes in and shows that not one of these beliefs continues to unite American Jews today.
Not a single one.
Not one. That shared sacred framework that gave everyone that automatic sense of belonging and obligation, it's just fractured. The data shows a complete structural collapse of this unifying civil religion, and it's driven almost entirely by demographic shifts inside the community.
Okay, let's drill down on that demographic shift, because it's tied to how people are even defining themselves as Jewish now. The Pew survey made this really crucial distinction that highlights the split.
It did. It made this critical analytical split between Jews by religion versus Jews of no religion. For decades, community studies would just look at denominations. Are you Reform, Conservative, Orthodox? But that just doesn't capture the reality anymore.
So why is this new distinction so important? What does it tell us?
Because this group, Jews of no religion, these are people who, when you ask them, they say they are Jewish, but only ethnically or culturally or by their family background. They explicitly say Judaism is not their religion.
And how big is this group?
It's about 1/3 of the entire American Jewish community. And the crucial thing is the sources show this massive, almost polar opposite difference in behavior, in belief, in engagement between these two groups. And that difference directly explains why those pillars of the civil religion dissolved. For a huge part of the population, the unifying element of faith is just gone.
So you have a community where 1/3 of the people identify as Jewish, but they see it through a purely cultural, non-religious, ancestral lens. And that leads us straight to the most volatile data point of all, marriage trends.
It is the primary dividing line, no question. When you look at the demographic consequence of this secular drift, it's just staggering. For non-Orthodox Jews who got married since 2010, a stunning 72% intermarried.
72%.
This high rate of interfaith marriage fundamentally changes the makeup of the Jewish household. And because of that, it changes the entire mechanism for how Jewish identity and that old civil religion gets passed on to the next generation.
Okay, this is the perfect transition. Let's move fully into this idea of internal fragmentation.
Yeah.
Because that intermarriage number isn't just high, you're saying it's accelerating. It's creating this irreversible momentum. Let's just sit with that number for a second. 72% of non-Orthodox Jews who married in the last decade or so intermarried. That is a massive transformation.
It's a revolution in communal life. And that the 72% figure, that's the rate for Jewish individuals who are intermarried. But to really understand the impact on the community as a whole, on the actual structure of Jewish America, you have to translate that individual rate into a rate of household formation.
Okay, how do you do that? How do you get from an individual's choice to the makeup of the community's new families?
Well, you can't just do simple multiplication with a complex survey, but analysts use a kind of geometric estimation to figure out the household impact. Basically, if 72% of Jewish individuals are marrying non-Jews, statistically, the likelihood of 2 Jewish partners just happening to find each other drops. Well, it drops geometrically. The analysis suggests that a 72% individual rate implies an 84% couples rate.
84%. So wait, Let me just translate that. We are saying that close to, or even more than, 3/4 of all new Jewish households formed in the last decade are interfaith households.
That's what the math suggests.
That is a completely different foundation for a community than what existed in the Golden Age.
Yeah.
The exception of the past is now the overwhelming norm.
It is the new norm, and what makes this change so permanent feeling is the generational trajectory the data shows. This isn't a trend that's going to magically reverse itself. Among married Jews, who are themselves the children of intermarried parents, an incredible 82% are intermarried.
82%. So the children of intermarried parents are even more likely to follow that same path.
Much more likely. Now compare that to the 34% intermarriage rate for children of two Jewish parents. The momentum is just undeniable. The rate essentially doubles if the previous generation was already intermarried. It suggests that the environment of that mixed faith household, it's just far more likely to produce adults who also marry outside the faith.
This feels like we're watching the complete fulfillment of that prophecy from Stephen M. Cohen, The Tale of Two Jewries. He was a prominent sociologist who warned about this years ago, didn't he? That these sharp differences would develop between Jews who marry in and Jews who marry out.
It validates his prophecy completely. The Pew survey doesn't just confirm the divide, it quantifies it in stark terms. If you look at those two groups, the in-married versus the intermarried, the Jews by religion versus the Jews of no religion, their lives, their beliefs, their futures, they're on totally divergent paths.
Give me the numbers on that.
Look at the basic marital patterns. 68% of Jews by religion have Jewish spouses, but among Jews of no religion, 79% have non-Jewish spouses. You're calling them both Jewish, but you're describing two communities operating under completely different social and familial rules.
And this divide, this tale of two Jewries, it maps directly onto the collapse of those four pillars of the civil religion we talked about.
Right.
So let's connect the dots. How does this schism affect their connection to the wider community?
You see profound differences in how connected they feel. Take that first pillar, the unity of the Jewish people. Let's translate that into a personal feeling, a sense of belonging.
Okay.
Only 27% of intermarried people say they feel a sense of belonging to the Jewish people a great deal. Now compare that to 72% of in-married people.
Wow. That's a nearly 3-to-1 gap.
It's a massive gap in felt loyalty and identification. It suggests that for the intermarried group, being Jewish is one identity among many. It's not their primary defining source of who they are.
And what about that pillar of mutual responsibility? The idea that you have to help Jews in need around the world. That was the moral engine of the community for so long.
That sense of global obligation also drops off significantly for the non-religious and intermarried group. While 87% of all Jews by religion feel a responsibility to help Jews in need globally, fewer than 2/3 of Jews of no religion feel that same pull.
So that shared innate sense of obligation that the civil religion relied on, it's just not there for a huge chunk of the population.
It's strongest among the religiously identified and those married within the faith. They're the ones maintaining that traditional communal framework.
But the widest gap, the most dramatic one, is around the most existential pillar of all. Jewish survival, the continuation of the people. This was a bedrock concern for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Driven by history.
This is maybe the most shocking and structurally predictive statistic in the entire survey. The question was simple. Is it important for your grandchildren to be Jewish? And the answers show a complete fracturing of values. This isn't about God. This is about the conscious continuation of the group.
Let's hear those figures,
Yeah.
because they are just so crucial to understanding the future here.
Okay. 91% of Orthodox Jews say it's very important their grandchildren be Jewish. 62% of conservative Jews agree. So those groups are still committed to continuity. But when you look at the non-religious segment, the numbers just fall off a cliff.
How far?
Only 4% of Jews of no religion say it's very important their grandchildren be Jewish. And only 11% of those who say they have no particular branch agree.
4%. Wait, stop. 4%. As in 4 out of 100.
4 out of 100.
That's not a decline. That's a complete structural break from the historical understanding of what it means to be Jewish. This group just does not prioritize ethnic or religious continuity.
And the implication is enormous. If a third of your community is forming households where only 4% prioritize continuity, what happens to your institutions? To your fundraising, to your political mobilization? What is the motivation to support these big, expensive communal structures if continuity isn't a goal?
And that data point is what pulls this out of the world of abstract numbers and into the very real, very human experience of having to negotiate your identity in your own home. We talked about the story of Sarah and Mark, and it just illustrates the emotional weight of that 4% statistic perfectly.
Yeah, that anecdote about Sarah, the Jewish wife, and Mark, her secular husband, They freeze when the smell of the Christmas tree fills their apartment. That wasn't a fight about theology. It was a gut reaction to the fear of cultural erasure, a sudden realization that her identity is no longer the default.
She saw a symbol of a culture so dominant it could just effortlessly swallow hers whole. They weren't negotiating faith. They were negotiating which history would be at the center of their son's life.
And that is the daily reality for the vast majority of new Jewish households. Identity is now a difficult, conscious, human negotiation. It takes emotional labor, usually from the Jewish partner, to actively choose and build and defend the Jewish part of the household. It's not something you just inherit anymore. It's a choice you have to fight for, sometimes over the smell of a pine tree.
That anxiety is the real-world consequence of that 4% number. But okay, so the implication seems to be that the non-Orthodox community is shrinking, or at least becoming so diffuse it's weak. And yet, we hit this strange paradox in the data. While all these observance metrics are declining, the retention rate of children from intermarriages seems to be rising.
It is. It's the necessary counterpoint to the, doom and gloom story. There's a sliver of resilience here, but you have to look at it very carefully. The retention rate among children of intermarried parents aged 18 to 49 is 47%.
47%, that's up from what?
It's way up from just 21% for those who are 50 and older. So the share of kids from intermarriages who are choosing to identify as Jewish in adulthood, it seems to be rising dramatically.
Okay, nearly half is not nothing. That suggests that even in these more complex homes, the kids are finding a way to connect. What are the theories for why that retention is going up?
Well, there are a few ideas. One is that society is just more comfortable with multicultural identity now, so it's easier for a kid to claim multiple heritages without feeling a conflict. Another is that communal efforts are finally working, inclusive reform programs, secular Jewish summer camps, things like that.
But the Pew report itself adds a really important caveat here about the causal arrow. It says we should be skeptical.
Yes, and this caveat is vital. We can't just assume that the intermarriage is causing the identity loss. The data could easily point the other way.
Meaning?
Meaning that people whose Jewish identity is already weak or purely cultural to begin with, they might just see it as less important to find a Jewish spouse in the first place. So the people marrying out might have always been less engaged. It's a self-selection bias.
I see. So the kids who are being retained might be the ones whose parents, even in a mixed marriage, were already proactive about passing something on.
Exactly. And if that's true, it totally shifts the strategy. It means the goal isn't necessarily stopping intermarriage, but strengthening the secular value of the identity that's being transmitted.
Which leads right to the core transformation. What does being Jewish even mean for this growing group? It's less about religion, less about creed, and much more about ancestry and culture.
That is the dominant trend. For the intermarried and the Jews of no religion, that's the whole story. Only 28% of intermarrieds say religion is very or somewhat important to them. Compare that to 66% of inmarrieds. For this secular population, being Jewish is about ancestry, shared history, and culture. The food, the humor, the connection to social justice ethics.
Let's use that anecdote about Ben, the graphic designer. He's the perfect example. He loves the culture, the argumentative style, the food, the history of social justice. But he skips Yom Kippur to go to brunch.
Ben's story just perfectly captures this. He feels 100% Jewish, but his commitment is to the ethos and the heritage, not the faith or the religious law, the prayers, the fasting. It feels like an antique obligation to him, not a living spiritual reality. He's choosing brunch over belief.
So the big question for the community is, can that cultural connection, the bagels, the humor, the social action, can that be strong enough to sustain the community through generations of this? Can it replace the old pillar of religious law?
That is the ultimate test of resilience, and the data does suggest that cultural sharing is the new form of engagement. One really interesting data point is that 61% of intermarried people say they share Jewish culture and holidays with non-Jewish friends. That's remarkably close to the 66% of in-married people who say the same thing.
So their engagement is outward-facing. It's expressive. They might not be in a synagogue, but they're hosting a seder, they're lighting a menorah, and they're inviting their non-Jewish friends to join in. It becomes a social and cultural event.
It's a fundamentally different model of engagement. The traditional structure asks you to come into the institution to be Jewish. This new cultural engagement is taken out into the wider American landscape. It's a shift from institutional adherence to cultural performance.
But this approach still comes with big barriers when it comes to formal community engagement, right? The data showed that a lot of people feel unprepared or even unwelcome.
It does. For intermarried individuals, a big obstacle was, quote, don't think I know enough to participate. 24% of them said that, compared to just 14% of in-marrieds. It suggests that the cultural route, watching Seinfeld or making latkes, it doesn't give you the confidence or the knowledge to engage in a more religious setting. You can't read the Hebrew, you can't follow the prayers.
And even more concerning, 8% of intermarried people said they didn't feel welcome at services.
That number might sound low, but it's really significant. If nearly 1 in 10 intermarried people feels unwelcome, the community is actively pushing away the very group that now defines its future. The welcome mat is visibly frayed.
And this feeds directly into the strain we see on the different denominations, especially for the movement that was historically in the center. The data on the conservative movement shows a really painful decline.
It's a severe crisis. The conservative movement, which was supposed to be the bridge between Orthodox tradition and Reform adaptation, it's just hemorrhaging members. Only 41% of people who were raised conservative still identify as conservative today.
Where are they going?
30% of them now identify as Reform, and observers attribute a lot of this to the movement's less welcoming policies around interfaith marriage compared to the Reform movement, which has been much more inclusive.
So as intermarriage became the norm for the non-Orthodox, the stricter rules of the conservative movement just pushed people away.
It seems to have accelerated the move toward reform or just totally secular identification. It was a structural failure to adapt to the new demographic reality.
So the big takeaway from this whole section on internal fragmentation is, it's clear the American Jewish community is splitting into two distinct groups. You have a highly committed, largely unmarried religious minority, and then you have this vastly growing secular intermarried majority. And they're only held together by the thinnest thread of shared ancestry.
That's the detailed internal picture. And now we have to pivot to what a lot of thinkers are calling the unsettling dual reality, which is this powerful internal erosion we've just detailed, happening at the exact same time as an aggressive external reckoning.
Right. So we've established the cracks in the foundation are severe, the unity is gone, intermarriage is the norm. And now we have to look at the hostile weather pounding the house from the outside. That anxiety we started with, it comes from the collision of these two things, disintegration and hostility.
And thinkers are calling this the triple erosion. The three forces that are compounding this identity crisis and threatening the whole American success story, those three forces are, 1, the resurgence of anti-Semitism, 2, rising political polarization, and 3, the weakening of Jewish identity that we've just spent so much time on.
Okay, let's focus on that first one. The modern landscape of anti-Semitism. The sources we're looking at say the nature of the hostility is shifting. It's being fueled by political tension from both extremes.
That's the key point. It's not monolithic anymore. It's coming from multiple, often contradictory directions. You see rhetoric rising from the extreme right, often framed around populist nationalism and critiques of so-called globalist or elite Jewish influence. You hear this from certain prominent media personalities.
And at the same time, you're getting pressure from the radical left.
Correct. On the left, the critiques are often deeply tied into anti-Zionist rhetoric, which can blur the line between legitimate criticism of Israeli policy and hostility toward Jews as a people. It's often framed in the language of colonial power, which can equate Zionism with white supremacy.
And the sources also note that the growth and political mobilization of the American Muslim population contributes to this dynamic, especially on campus and in local politics.
Right, where the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is often a major focus. But perhaps the most visible and frankly unnerving place this is playing out is on university campuses. These places were once the ultimate symbol of successful Jewish integration. Now they feel like symbols of exclusion.
Absolutely. The universities, which were the peak of Golden Age achievement access, meritocracy, influence, are now the primary venue for this conflict. Anti-Israel activity, especially after recent conflicts in the Middle East, has just fundamentally shifted the discourse. It has normalized rhetoric that used to be seen as clearly anti-Semitic. And we can't forget the personal cost of this on the students themselves. We have that story of Maya, the student at a big public university in California.
Maya's story just encapsulates this feeling of diminished social acceptance perfectly. She wasn't an activist, but she wore a small gold Star of David necklace. In her sociology class, a discussion turned hostile, and she felt like she was being implicitly targeted as a colonizer. The whole environment just changed in an instant.
And what she did next? Tucking her necklace under her shirt before walking into the student union? It's just so telling. It reflects this sudden, profound feeling of insecurity, having to hide a core part of your identity in the very place that was supposed to guarantee acceptance.
That chilling moment? It just says so much. It tells you the external environment has become so hostile that you have to choose safety over self-expression. It's a complete reversal of the golden age promise of confident integration.
And beyond the personal toll on students like Maya, there's a bigger structural consequence here for the community's future influence.
Yes. This is key to understanding the end of the golden age. There's been a significant, decades-long drop in the number of Jewish students at many top-tier elite universities. And this is seen as a sign of weakening influence on future American elites.
Because those are the schools that feed into finance, media, and policy.
Exactly. If Jewish students aren't present in high numbers there, the community's organic access to the American power structure just naturally shrinks over time. It's a direct threat to that continued success.
Okay, let's move to the second element of the triple erosion.
Yeah.
Rising political polarization. The Golden Age, as you said, was defined by peak bipartisan support. Now that unity is gone.
The consensus has completely cracked, and this is a massive stress test for the community's political establishment. On the Democratic left, you're seeing anti-Israel rhetoric move from the fringe right into the mainstream, and it's often successful. You look at the case of Zohran Mamdani, who won a major election in a big city. He's known for his anti-Israel rhetoric, and yet he's still got substantial support, even from more than a third of Jewish voters in his district.
Which highlights a critical fracture within the Jewish community itself.
It does. It reveals this deepening split between the traditional, staunchly pro-Israel stance of the Golden Age and this growing segment of younger, progressive Jews who are deeply worried about Israel's actions and who prioritize social justice over traditional foreign policy. When you can't even agree on the centrality of Israel pillar anymore, you lose your political cohesion.
And this isn't a theoretical debate anymore, especially after recent conflicts in Gaza. The war has had a very real, very negative impact on American public opinion.
The shift in public sentiment is stark, and it was rapid. Even though you had strong support from both Republican and Democratic administrations for Israel during the conflict, the sheer devastation in the media coverage led to U.S. public sympathy for Israel hitting an unprecedented low. Government support might still be there, but that shift in public feeling creates a huge long-term challenge.
And this political turbulence directly affects what was once seen as an unassailable force, the Jewish lobbying machine in Washington. If public sympathy is dropping, the lobbyists' jobs get exponentially harder.
Absolutely. The sources suggest that the lobbying power that defined the Golden Age is in decline. And this isn't just a theory. You have prominent political figures saying it out loud. Donald Trump, for example, openly observed that Israel's influence in Congress is significantly reduced compared to what it was decades ago.
That's a remarkable observation, especially from him. Why is that shift happening?
It's a few things. First, the political landscape is changing. The rise of a more progressive wing in the Democratic Party means pro-Israel stances are no longer automatic. Second, Congress itself is more diverse, and lawmakers are often prioritizing domestic issues over foreign policy unless there's a direct electoral benefit. And third, and maybe most importantly, that split within the Jewish community means the lobbying groups don't speak with one voice anymore. It's hard to lobby for the Jewish position when a big chunk of Jewish voters are actively criticizing that position.
So the community's political influence and the Golden Age itself are waning, threatened by this convergence of internal identity erosion and external political headwinds. How does someone like Elliot Abrams, who really lived and shaped that Golden Age, sum up this crisis?
Abrams, a prominent Republican policy figure, he frames the whole situation as a serious decline. He sees that triple erosion, the identity collapse, the anti-Semitism, the political headwinds as a fundamental threat. He asks directly whether that traditional triangular relationship between U.S. Jewry, the U.S. public, and Israel is starting to buckle under the strain. If those 3 points of the triangle are no longer supporting each other, the whole structure could collapse.
So the anxiety we started with, that feeling of the foundation cracking, it's completely warranted. This is a total structural transformation. It's driven by demographics, by secularization, and by political pressure.
Exactly. The key finding is that the American Jewish community is moving from a unified religious ideology, that strong civil religion with its 4 sacred pillars, to a collection of highly diversified, polarized, and often just culturally defined identities. The non-religious segment is only loosely bound by ancestry and culture, and it lacks the structural resilience that religious institutions always provided.
So, if the foundation is cracking, if the Golden Age is over, what's the prescription? What are community leaders proposing as a path forward? Is there a path forward?
The consensus among serious thinkers is that this era can be survived. and maybe even redefined into a new resilient form. But it requires a conscious, organized, and very strategic effort. This isn't a moment for just hoping for the best. It's a time for active resource redirection.
And this brings us back to Elliot Abrams' call to action, specifically about philanthropy and where the money is going.
Right. He argued very forcefully that the community has to radically re-examine its priorities. Historically, a huge amount of philanthropic money went to support those four pillars of the civil religion: Israel, global Jewish relief, traditional institutions. But Abrams says the community has to recognize that the internal structures are what's failing now.
So what's his proposal? Where should the money go?
He argues that at least 50% of all Jewish donations should be targeted directly at strengthening Jewish identity and communal influence in America, not on external causes. This means dramatically increasing funding for Jewish education, for cultural programming, for community centers that actively welcome interfaith families, and for political advocacy groups that are dedicated to fighting domestic anti-Semitism and strengthening the domestic social fabric.
So he's basically saying, stop focusing so much on external aid and start fixing the leaks in your own house. Treat the identity crisis like a massive infrastructure project that needs immediate investment.
It's a recognition that you can't maintain political influence or external relevance if your internal identity is collapsing. You have to invest heavily in passing on Jewish knowledge and culture to this rising secular intermarried generation if you want them to feel a strong enough connection to donate or advocate for anything in the future.
So the future resilience of the community really rests on two central questions. The first one is about the rise of the cultural Jew. Can culture alone, the shared history, the humor, the social justice, the food, can that be enough to sustain the connection through generations of intermarriage and secularization?
And if the answer to that is yes, then the future of the community looks like a highly decentralized, networked cultural diaspora. It would be less reliant on synagogues and more on shared media, history, and ethics. A Jewishness defined by shared ancestry and values, not shared faith.
And the second question addresses the challenge from the collapse of that old civil religion. If culture isn't enough to stop that 4% continuity number from defining the future, then what new common language of belonging has to emerge?
It means consciously building a new foundation. It can't be the specific faith claims of the past. It might have to be a newly articulated philosophy of belonging that consciously integrates that cultural and ancestral identity with a compelling modern social mission. The community has to make a proactive, collective choice to build a new framework, because the old one, the confident foundation of the Golden Age, is no longer holding.
A powerful and a very challenging set of findings. Thank you for walking us through the data and the history behind this really profound shift.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We look forward to analyzing the next set of sources with you soon.